Close your eyes and imagine you are standing in the middle of a desolate cornfield in northern Poland. The cold wind hisses through the dry leaves. Beneath your feet, 2 meters deep in the cold earth, lies a secret buried for 400 years. No one wanted it to be found. In August 2022, an archaeological team from Nicholas Copernicus University was digging in the village of Pien. They were not looking for treasure. They were not looking for kings. They were excavating a cemetery a place the locals whispered about as the field of cursed souls. Their trowels hit something hard. Not stone, not bone, but iron. Rusted iron. When the last layer of dirt was brushed away, a sight emerged that made even the most seasoned archaeologists hold their breath. A female skeleton lay there, but she was not resting in peace. She was being held captive. Right across her neck, cutting across the throat, was a sharp, curved iron sickle. Picture the structure of this trap. The sickle was not placed next to her as a personal item. No, it was placed blade down. The razor-sharp edge was aligned with millimeter precision right over her throat. Its purpose was cruel and specific. Archaeologists call this measure double protection. If this woman woke up in her coffin, if she tried to sit up to escape, with just the slightest upward movement, her neck would automatically press against the sickle blade. Her head would be severed instantly. They buried her with a death trap. A trap designed to trigger post-mortem. That is, the first horror. But look down at her feet. On the big toe of her left foot, they found the second piece of evidence. A triangular iron padlock. It was heavy, rusted and shut tight. This padlock did not lock onto anything. It only locked onto her toe. In the 17th century Eastern European folklore, this was a symbol of absolute finality. The padlock symbolized closing the case. It was a message to the dead soul. You are locked in the afterlife. Do not dare to return. Do not dare to wander. A sickle to behead. A padlock to seal the soul. How much did they fear this woman? We usually think these types of graves, these vampire or anti-magic graves, are for criminals, for witches, or the filthy poor, despised by society. But this is where the story gets strange. And this is the paradox that has puzzled scientists for the last 2 years. As experts carefully removed the dirt around the skull, they discovered traces of fabric, not rough, but it was silk. On the head of the shackled girl was a hood made of the finest silk, woven with extreme intricacy. Gold thread, yes, real gold, was woven into the fabric. Its color, though faded by time, still radiated undeniable luxury. Let us pause a moment to feel this contradiction. The crude iron sickle, a symbol of peasant violence, lying right next to the gold-embroidered silk hood, a symbol of the aristocratic elite. Archaeological evidence suggests she was not a starving peasant. This girl, whom we will tentatively call Zosia, likely came from a very wealthy family, perhaps even the social elite of that time. So why would a noble young lady, buried with fine silks, be treated like a bloodthirsty monster? Why did her family, or her neighbors, respect her body with silk, yet want to imprison her soul with iron? To understand this, we need to go back in time, not just looking at the skeleton, but looking into the minds of those shoveling dirt onto her. We are in the mid-17th century, a dark age in European history. This is the era of the deluge, literally and figuratively. The Swedish army is invading. War is ravaging everywhere. Crops are failing. Famine stalks every home. And when people are afraid, when people are starving, they need something to blame. They need a scapegoat. Modern psychology calls this mass hysteria. When a community faces disaster, logic disappears, and superstition takes the throne. They start looking around. Who is different? Who brings bad luck? And Zosia, with secrets hidden inside her body, became the perfect target. But what did she do? Did she kill anyone? Did she curse anyone? The answer lies right in her bones. And this is the latest discovery, a discovery that completely changes how we view this grave. Scientists took Zosia's sternum to the lab. They used the most modern CT scanners to look through the fossilized calcium. And they found an unusual trace. A tumor, medically known as a hemangioma. Imagine the chest of that 18-year-old girl. Instead of being normally flat, it might have been deformed by this tumor. Picture the chest caved inward like a bowl, or protruding abnormally, like the keel of a ship. This deformity did not just affect her appearance. It might have been the source of all misunderstandings. Experts hypothesized that this tumor pressed on her lungs and heart, causing excruciating pain. These medical symptoms could have been tragically misinterpreted. She might have fainted suddenly from pain, her face draining of blood, or falling into a temporary unconscious state. Today a doctor would say, she has a sternal hemorrhage, she needs pain management. But around the year 1655, the villagers of Pien saw her fall, turn cold, then wake up. They did not see a patient. They saw a demon. It was that simple. They whispered to each other, "That girl has two souls." It was a common belief at the time that some people were born with two souls. When Te Died one soul left the body, but the other, Te Evo's soul remained, waiting, and would rise again as a striga, a vampiric demon, to drain the life force of the living. Zosia was sentenced to death by her own diseased body. The tragedy is, she might have died from that very disease, or she might have died from natural causes, but her death did not bring peace to the village. It brought panic. They were afraid she would come back. And so, during that solemn funeral, amidst the fake or real weeping, there were burly men assigned a special task. When the coffin lid was about to close, they stepped forward, placed the cold sickle on the young girl's neck, snapped the iron lock onto her toe. They sighed in relief. They believed they had just saved the entire village from a disaster. They believed they were good people. But were they really? History has a way of exposing the truth, very ironically. 400 years later, when the dirt is turned over, what we see is not a captive monster, but a tortured victim. But how do we know for sure what she looked like? How do we know if her eyes were truly as evil as rumored? That is when Oscar Nilsson enters the story, and that is when the magic of 2024 technology starts to speak. Oscar Nilsson is no ordinary forensic artist. He is a sculptor of lost souls, a man who uses clay and silicone to pull the past back into reality. His mission with Zosia was not just science. It was he began this work in his quiet lab in Sweden, thousands of kilometers away from the cold grave in Poland. But the haunting presence remained intact. He did not touch Zosia's real skull. It was too fragile. It had lain under the weight of 2 meters of earth for centuries. If handled too roughly, it could crumble into dust. Instead, Oscar worked on a 3D printed replica, a stark white plastic skull, accurate to the smallest detail of the eye sockets and jawbone. This is where forensic science becomes art. Observe how he works. Oscar does not just slap flesh onto bone randomly. He uses an incredibly complex anatomical map. He drills dozens of small pegs into the plastic skull. Each peg marks the exact thickness of soft tissue at that point. Cheeks, chin, forehead, eye sockets. Every muscle fiber is layered on. Every layer of subcutaneous fat is recreated. Oscar knows that Zosia's bone structure tells a different story than the one the villagers of Pien have. Her jawbone is slender. Her eye sockets are large and deep. The distance between her eyes is very symmetrical. This is not the skull of a coarse or deformed woman. This is the framework of a beauty. He uses special clay to sculpt each muscle group. The masseter muscles for chewing, the orbicularis oris for smiling, the frontalis for frowning. As the layers of clay gradually fill the voids, a face begins to emerge from nothingness. It is no longer an inanimate object. It begins to have a spirit, but the soul of a statue lies in the eyes. Oscar chose deep blue eyes for her. Based on the common genetic data of the region at that time, he carefully placed 2 glass eyeballs into the sockets. Then the eyelids, then the soft, silicone skin. This process took hundreds of hours of meticulous labor. Oscar once shared that he feels like he is conversing with the dead. He tries to listen to how they want to be seen. And then, the moment of truth arrived, when the final layer of silicone was finished, when the short hair was implanted strand by strand into the scalp, then carefully covered by the recreated silk hood. Zosia returned. She does not have long fangs. She does not have the bloodshot eyes of a demon. The person staring back at us is a young girl of about 80. Big, round eyes shining with intelligence, but tinged with sadness. A slightly protruding front tooth that looks mischievous. Smooth, fair skin. She looks exactly like a college student you might meet in a coffee shop today. She could be your friend, your sister, or a lover. This contrast creates a massive psychological shock. Place the photo of this innocent reconstructed face next to the photo of the rusted iron sickle. You will see the absurdity reach its peak. How could people hold a sharp blade against the neck of a girl like this? How could people lock the toe of a child who had just stepped into life? To answer the question why, we cannot just look at Zosia. We must look at her neighbors. the ones who held the shovels and sickles that day. Let us return to the context around the year 1655. The village of Pien, hell on earth. The Swedish army was flooding across the border like a deluge. They burned villages, looted property, killed men and raped women. Fear blanketed everything. The people of Pien lived in constant dread every day. They did not know if they would be alive tomorrow. In social psychology, when humans are backed into a corner of fear and helplessness, they tend to look for a scapegoat. They need a specific cause for their suffering. They could not stop the Swedish army, but they could punish an insider of the devil. And Zosia was the victim of that paranoia. Historians propose a heartbreaking theory. Zosia might not have been a native, or her family had some connection to the enemy. Remember the gold-embroidered silk hood. It was not just a symbol of wealth. It could have been a sign of a foreigner. Did she come from Sweden, or did her family trade with the Swedes? In the eyes of the starving, war-hating villagers of Pien, Zosia's wealth and difference were a thorn in their side. When she fell ill, when the pain from the sternum tumor made her faint and convulse, people did not see sickness. They saw God's punishment. Or worse, they saw the embodiment of evil infiltrating the village. They whispered, "Why are we starving while she wears silk? Why do our children die in battle while she still lives?" She must have sold her soul to the devil. Envy turned into fear. Fear turned into cruelty. Burying Zosia with anti-vampire rituals was not just to prevent her from reviving. It was a public act of punishment. A way for the community to assert its power. They wanted to say, "We have controlled the evil. We are safe." They killed her dignity twice. The first time with isolation when she was alive, and the second time with the iron sickle when she was dead. But the scariest part is not what they did in the past. The scariest part is the silence of history. For 400 years, no one mentioned her name. No tombstone. No records. Only rumors of a demon buried in the cornfield. They wiped out her existence completely. If not for the archaeological team in 2022, if not for the talented hands of Oscar Nilsson, Zosia would have remained a nameless skeleton under the Reaper's blade forever. Looking at her newly reconstructed face, we see a naked truth. The monster does not lie in the grave. The monster lies in the minds of the living. But the story does not stop there. When Oscar Nilsson finished his work, when Zosia's eyes looked back at the modern world for the first time, a strange phenomenon occurred. The locals in Pien, descendants of those who once snapped that iron lock, began to have reactions no one expected. They were no longer afraid. Instead, there was a completely different emotion. That emotion was heartbreak. When the image of Zosia's reconstructed face was released widely, the modern villagers of Pien did not see a monster. They saw a neighbor, someone they might have greeted on the village road every morning. The wall of fear collapsed instantly, replaced by haunting questions. Was she in pain? How lonely was she in the final days of her life? Professor Darius Poliskaj, who led the excavation, said something that makes us reflect. He said, "History is usually written by the winners. But here, history is written by the fearful." And that fear did not stop with Zosia. Just about 2 meters from Zosia's grave, the archaeological team found another secret. A secret infinitely more heartbreaking. It was a tiny skeleton, very small. Scientists determined this was a child, only about 5 to 7 years old. This child did not have a sickle placed on their neck, but their burial was cruel in a different way. The child was buried face down. In ancient beliefs, burying someone face down had a terrifying meaning. People believed that if this child woke up and tried to dig to escape, they would not dig up towards the surface. They would dig deeper into hell. Burying face down was to direct the evil away from the world of the living. And that is not all. On the child's heel, they also found a triangular iron padlock, similar to Zosia. Picture that scene. A 5-year-old child who might have died from the plague, or malaria, or malnutrition. But instead of being held and comforted one last time, they were thrown into a cold pit, flipped face down into the black mud, and locked at the feet. What did they fear in a 5-year-old child? The answer lies in ignorance. In the 17th century, medicine was not science. It was a chaotic mess of religion, superstition, and rumors. When a person dies, their body undergoes biological changes that the ancients could not explain. Imagine you are a 17th century peasant. A few days after burying a loved one, you hear strange sounds coming from the grave. Gurgling sounds, groans. Today, forensic science explains that it is just gas, accumulating in the abdomen, escaping through the windpipe. But to the ancients, that was the call of the devil. Or when they, out of sheer terror, decided to dig up the grave to check, they saw the dead person's hair and nails appearing to grow longer. The facial skin looked pinker, even shiny, and the mouth was stained with blood. We know that hair and nails do not grow. It is just the flesh shrinking, exposing the roots and nail beds. The shine is due to gas buildup bloating the body, and the blood at the mouth is decomposing internal organs purging upwards. These are all natural phenomena, but in the eyes of the Pien villagers back then, these signs meant only one thing. The dead were still alive. They were eating well. They were getting fat by draining the life force of the living. It was a deadly logic. Because I am sick, someone must be cursing me. Because the person in the grave still looks pink, it must be the one cursing me. So we must kill it one more time. Zosia and that child became victims of that logic. But there is a detail about Zosia that particularly caught the scientists' attention. A detail that shows the inner conflict of those who buried her. Remember the position of the sickle? It did not touch her skin. It lay a very small distance from her throat, just a few millimeters. If they truly hated her, absolutely, they could have beheaded her instantly, or drove a wooden stake through her heart, like in other legends. But they did not. They placed the trap there. But they left her a way out. The message here is very clear. If you lie still, you will be safe. We respect your body. But if you dare to return, this sickle will not forgive. This is the fragile boundary between love and fear. Perhaps her parents tried to protect their daughter's body until the very end. They agreed to let the villagers place the sickle in the lock, in exchange for her being buried properly in the holy cemetery, instead of being dumped at the edge of the forest. The gold-embroidered silk hood is proof of that love, even if the whole world considered her a monster. Her mother still wanted her to leave this world looking her most beautiful. Oscar Nilsson, when touching the contours of Zosia's face, felt this deep sorrow. He was not just recreating a face, he was recreating dignity, looking into the blue eyes of the Reconstruction. We do not see hatred. We see resignation. She seems to want to say, I am not a monster. I am just an unlucky girl born in the wrong era. Zosia's story is not just a tale of the past. It is. Amira, look around us today. Do we still create monsters like that? Do we still isolate people with strange diseases? Do we still shun those who are different from the majority? Do we still let fear guide our actions instead of understanding? In 2024, we have CT scanners. We have DNA testing. We know external hemangioma is not a sign of the devil. But have we truly stopped fearing what we do not understand? Zosia's grave in the village of Pien has now become a special place. Not a place to hunt ghosts, but a place to learn about tolerance. And when the final pieces of this story are put together, we realize a lesson much greater. A lesson about how we treat each other when disaster strikes. To truly close the book on Zosia's story, we need to answer one final question. A haunting question. Why were the villagers of Pien so maddeningly afraid? Specifically, what were they afraid Zosia would turn into? We often use the word vampire as a general term, but in 17th century Slavic folklore, the thing they feared was not a charming Dracula in a black cape. The thing they feared was a striga. In the imagination of the ancient Polish peasant, a striga was a far more hideous creature. It was believed that a striga was born from people with two souls. When they died, one soul flew to heaven. The other soul, dark and angry, remained trapped in the corpse. The most terrifying thing about a striga is not that it drinks the blood of strangers, but its first target. According to legend, when a striga rises from the grave, the first people it seeks to kill are its own family. Parents, siblings, spouses. It will sneak home at night, draining the life force of its loved ones until they wither and die. This detail completely changes how we view Zosia's grave. Remember the gold-embroidered silk hood. Remember her family's wealth. Maybe, just maybe, the imprisonment of Zosia did not stem from the villagers' hatred, but from her own family's fear. Imagine the pain of Zosia's parents. They had just lost their beloved daughter. But they also heard the rumors. They were afraid that tonight, or tomorrow night, that daughter would return, not to hug them, but to kill them. The iron lock on Zosia's toe, the sickle on her neck. These might have been desperate acts of self-defense by a panicked family. They had to choose between their love for their child and their own survival. They chose survivor. And that is the greatest tragedy of superstition. It turns kinship into fear. It turns a home into a fortress. And it turns the departed into the enemy. But history always has its own justice. Even if that justice arrives late, 400 years late. Today Zosia is no longer a cursed striga. She has become a special ambassador of the past, The story of the vampire of Pien has spread across the world, from prestigious international newspapers to viral videos on social media. Millions of people have looked at her reconstructed face and felt compassion. She killed no one. On the contrary, she is teaching us valuable lessons. She teaches scientists about ancient paleopathology, about the sternal tumor and how it affected the human body in the past. She teaches historians about the brutality of the Swedish wars, about how society collapses when pressure weighs on the shoulders of poor peasants. And most importantly, she teaches all of us about humanity. Her grave in Pien is now protected. No one dares to disturb her sleep anymore. The iron sickle and the triangular padlock have been moved to a museum. They lie there, cold and rusted, as silent witnesses to a dark era that humanity has overcome. But have we really overcome it? Look at the world out there. We still see invisible sickles and padlocks everywhere. When we boycott someone on social media just because they are different, we are placing a sickle on their neck. When we spread misinformation out of fear, we are locking the truth with a rusted padlock. Zosia has been laid to rest, but the echo from her grave remains, standing in the cornfield at Pien today. The wind still blows. The leaves still rustle. But the air no longer carries the heavy scent of death. It carries the scent of earth, of life, and of forgiveness. We have removed the sickle for Zosia. We have unlocked her soul. And as we look into the blue eyes of Oscar Nilsson's Reconstruction one last time, perhaps we should promise ourselves that we will never let fear turn us into the ones holding the sickle ever again. Because, in the end, the monster is never the one lying in the grave. The monster can only live if we feed it in our hearts.